By 2013, Germany's Sebastian Vettel was a 29-time Grand Prix winner and 3-time world champion. But the Red Bull driver was yet to win a Formula One race on home soil. At that year's German Grand Prix at the Nurburgring, Vettel started the race from P2 alongside Lewis Hamilton, and a brilliant start saw him take the lead at turn 1. The Britain's challenge faded, but Vettel was still forced to hold off the rampant Lotuses of Romain Grosjean and Kimi Räikkönen to the very end, crossing the line just a second ahead of a charging Iceman.
You've won your home race! Well done, Sebastian. Great jive.
Despite his multiple championships, the chance to finally celebrate a race victory with his home fans was one that Vettel would savour. In 1965, the Nurburgring saw one of the all-time greats of F1, Jim Clark, produce a superlative display of skill and excellence, during which he completed one of the most elusive of motoring feats, a Grand Chelem, claiming pole position, the fastest lap of the race, and leading every lap on his way to the checkered flag. In the Lotus 33, arguably the outstanding car of the era, Clark's victory over some of F1's most formidable names, Hill, Gurney, Rindt and Brabham, saw him clinch the 1965 driver's title with 3 rounds left, at the time the earliest a champion had ever been crowned, and a record that would stand until 2002. In 1961, the shark-nosed Ferrari 156s were dominating the Formula One World Championship. And before that season's German Grand Prix, the only driver to deny them a race victory was the great Stirling Moss at Monaco, and it was a feat that he would repeat again at the Nurburgring. A rain shower convinced Moss to start the race on wet tyres, and although his Lotus was underpowered compared to his rivals, the superior grip and control his wet weather rubber offered in a race of shifting conditions meant that the Lotus driver finished a full 21 seconds ahead of his nearest rival, following a thrilling battle where the Ferraris would catch up in the dry but lose ground on the wet parts of the famous Nordschleife. It would prove to be the final win of Moss's illustrious F1 career, but was a fittingly outstanding performance that will never be forgotten. Mark Webber was already an F1 veteran, competing in his 8th Formula One season and in his 3rd year with Red Bull Racing, when he arrived at the Nürburgring for the 2009 German Grand Prix. The 32-year-old Australian scored a brilliant first pole position, but got off to a bumpy start when he collided with both Rubens Barrichello and Lewis Hamilton by the time he'd gone through turn 1. Webber received a drive-through penalty, but stayed out for as long as possible before serving it, with Webber's incredible pace enabling him to rejoin in the lead and gain a stranglehold on the race.
This is good, Mark. You're still a second a lap quicker than those behind. We can win this.
Webber's joy as he crossed the line was unbridled.
Yeah! There it is! Yes! 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 Yes!
He had waited almost a decade to stand on the top step of an F1 podium, and finally, he was a Grand Prix winner. At the grand old age of 47, Juan Manuel Fangio was a 4-time world champion and still very much at the peak of his motor racing powers. At the 1957 German Grand Prix, the Argentine had to draw the very best out of both himself and his Maserati to carve out a victory on the Nürburgring Nordschleife, and it was one that would stand amongst his very best. Fangio began the race by setting a series of lap records to open up a sizable lead before a disastrous pit stop left him trailing almost a minute behind the Ferraris of Mike Hawthorn and Peter Collins. But Fangio delivered the drive of his life, overhauling Collins and Hawthorn in the closing stages to win a race of over 500 kilometres by just 3 seconds. After the victory, Fangio said he would never be able to go so fast again. It was a prophecy that came true. This was his final victory in Formula One in the 1957 season that saw him win a 5th Formula One World Championship. The Stewart Grand Prix team were by no means a front runner in 1999, and at the European Grand Prix, Johnny Herbert and teammate Rubens Barrichello qualified in a lowly 14th and 15th respectively. However, with changeable weather conditions, Herbert made the right call to stay out on slick tyres, as several drivers further ahead changed to wets to deal with rain that quickly cleared away. By lap 32, Herbert was up to 6th and looking good for a points finish. But more drama was to come, as the drivers battling for the podium all came unstuck in quick succession.
Frenson stops. He's lost the prop.
Oh
And
no, Coulthard off the road.
David Coulthard has gone off. Yeah, and
there
then
he
he's
is.
Gala.
He stalled it too.
He's out of the race. And off goes Schumacher.
With the rain falling again, Herbert pitted for wets at the right time and found himself in the lead with 16 laps to go.
Johnny Herbert in the Stewart turns into corner 13 and takes the checkered flag to win.
The Briton held on for a momentous third and final win of his career and marked a fitting and emotional end to the Stewart team story in what would be their final season in Formula One. 1968 was a dark time for Formula One, with a series of deadly on-track incidents overshadowing the battle for that season's championship. And so it was that in August of that year, the teams arrived for the German Grand Prix at the most dangerous track of all, the 14-mile-long Nurburgring Nordschleife, nicknamed the Green Hell by Jackie Stewart. The conditions could barely have been worse, with a high-risk combination of rain, fog, and mist severely limiting drivers' visibility on a track already dotted with blind corners and brutal bends. As the race started, the spray from the cars created a wall of water. Stewart, a master of the wet, overtook the Lotus of Graham Hill and Chris Amon's Ferrari to take a decisive lead by the end of the first lap, before the Flying Scot found a new level of concentration and control as he delivered the drive of his life to win by an incredible 4 minutes. He was on another level that day, and it was, without question, one of the greatest single demonstrations of driving skill and exceptional bravery in F1 history. By the time championship rivals Niki Lauda and James Hunt arrived at the Nurburgring in 1976, their powerful 500 brake horsepower Chargers were ill-suited to the blind corners and bumps of the Nordschleife, built half a century earlier for racing cars from the 1920s. The combination of faster cars and an ageing track was a dangerous mix, even more so in wet weather. And despite the reservations of many drivers, including Ferrari's Lauda, the Grand Prix went ahead, with many drivers starting on wet tyres but pitting for dries at the end of the first lap. Lauda was one of those and was attempting to make up for lost time on a slippery track when he lost control of his car in one of the sport's most infamous moments. Enveloped in flames, he bounced back onto the track and was hit by 2 other cars before being heroically pulled from the wreckage by Arturo Mazzario, Guy Edwards, Brett Lunger and Harold Ertl. Despite being close to death due to severe burns and smoke inhalation, Lauda would return to the cockpit just 6 weeks later at Monza in an attempt to halt James Hunt's assault on his championship crown, finishing a remarkable 4th on his comeback. But his crash was the final straw for safety at the German circuit, and F1 cars would never again race on the Nordschleife and wouldn't return to the Nürburgring at all until 1984. Interest in Formula One skyrocketed in Germany after Michael Schumacher became the first German to win the Formula One World Championship, and his superstar status was rewarded by a second race in the country for 1995, as the Nürburgring played host to the European Grand Prix. Starting from third on the grid, Schumacher fought off the Williams of Damon Hill to run second behind Jean Alesi. But the Ferrari driver soon built up a commanding lead of over 30 seconds. But on his final stint, and willed on by 90,000 feverish fans, Schumacher charged back, and with just 2 laps to go, outbraked his rival with a stunning move at the Vettel chicane. Alesi's grip on the race was broken, and Schumacher never looked back as he went on to claim a memorable victory. The Nürburgring was the setting for the 2007 European Grand Prix, where a remarkable sequence of events created arguably the briefest moment of stardom in Formula One history. Germany's Markus Winkelhock was a relatively unknown test driver making his F1 debut after being given a last-minute seat by backmarker's Spiker. As the cars lined up to start, the clouds over the Nurburgring began to darken, and the team took the decision to call Winkelhock in, fit his car with wet tyres, and start him from the pit lane instead.
Box this lap. Box directly, Marcus. We're putting you on standard wet.
And it proved to be a masterstroke as the heavens opened over the Eifel Mountains, prompting virtually the entire field to pit at the end of lap 1. Winkelhock sailed by and then overtook the sliding Ferrari of Kimi Räikkönen, the only driver who stayed out. It was a stunning moment, and in just the second lap of his debut Grand Prix, driving the slowest car on the grid, Markus Winkelhock was in P1, with a race lead of over 30 seconds. But that was as good as it got. The television cameras soon cut to a huge pile-up of cars in the gravel at Turn 1, as the torrential rain caused drivers, including Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button, to aquaplane off the circuit. The race was red flagged, and following the restart, Winkelhock dropped down the order before retiring on lap 22 with a hydraulics failure. Spiker declined to offer Winkelhock a contract following the race, and the German never drove in Formula One again. His fleeting lead in a truly unbelievable Grand Prix remains one of the Nürburgring's most magical moments.